Good morning, everyone. We will start in about 30 seconds. I'll give time for as many of you as possible to be able to join our session this morning. So we'll speak to you very soon. So good morning and welcome everyone to this Black Leadership Job Board and Morgan Hunt joint webinar on women's leadership journeys, where we'll take a deep dive into women's leadership experiences and what it really takes for women to lead with confidence. We'll talk honestly about the ups and downs of women's leadership experiences and what gets in the way, what keeps us going, and how do we really build workplaces that support the next generation of female leaders coming through. My name is Claire Canary. I am a board director of Morgan Hunt. And for those of you who don't know Morgan Hunt, we're a UK-based recruitment business with offices in Glasgow, Manchester, Birmingham, and London. And in collaboration with the Black Leadership Group, we launched the Black Leadership Job Board 18 months ago in order to showcase Black talent and support organisations across the UK who are really looking to diversify their senior leadership teams. The Black Leadership Job Board is a wholly inclusive job board, and it is open to job seekers from any background, any sex, any race to apply. However, we do seek to promote it within specifically Black networks and communities and organisations in order to address the lack of Black representation in senior leadership roles in the UK, which still currently stands at about 1% of those senior leadership C-suite roles. And it's through that work that we met my two wonderful guests this morning. And I'm delighted to be joined by two fantastic female leaders who both bring powerful lived experience to our discussion today. I'd like to welcome Jamila Raymond, who is the Chief Operating Officer at the 10,000 Interns Foundation, which was launched in 2020 as a small project to address the lack of Black representation in the investment management sector and to offer paid internship opportunities to Black students and graduates. Jamila herself has a background in anti-corruption investigation, and 5 years later, the 10,000 Interns Foundation has recently hit 10,000 interns placed in paid internships across organisations in the UK. We are also joined this morning by Juliana Ansa, CEO and founder of Black Leaders in Healthcare. And she is also head of equality, diversity and inclusion at a leading London NHS Foundation Trust. Juliana has over 20 years experience in the health and social care sectors, and she's dedicated to tackling inequalities and driving real change in that sector. Just before we start our conversation this morning, a few pointers on our format and our session today. We'll aim to finish no later than 10:30 this morning, and that'll give us about 45 minutes for our general conversation. And I'll aim to leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your audience questions. But please, if you have any questions for our panel, I would ask you to post them on YouTube at any point in our conversation. We will see them and I'll endeavour to answer as many of them as possible as we go through our conversation. So please keep posting and we'll see those. So to kick us off, I thought it might be good to kind of set the scene with both of you. So Jamila, if I could come to you first, perhaps, could you share a little bit about your own personal leadership journey and I guess how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Thanks so much, Claire. And I'm very happy to be here today speaking to all of you. So I've always had a career in the third sector, in the nonprofit sector, one I'm really proud of. I started off as an intern just over 10 years ago. And as you mentioned, Claire, I did start off as an anti-corruption specialist, which is quite niche, to say the least. It's a very unique starting point for a career. But I did move on to increasingly general roles. I took on broader responsibilities, proving to others and myself that I was more than that specialist subject that I started with. I also want to mention that I took on leadership responsibilities outside of my 9 to 5. I became a trustee of a small charity about 4 years ago, another role I'm really proud of. And I think one that's really important to prove that you're more than the day job. And yeah, I became the Chief Operating Officer at the 10,000 Interns Foundation back in October 2024. So it's been what feels like a rapid journey, but one that I've learned a lot about along the way, and looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jamila. And Juliana, could you do the same? Could you tell us a little bit about your personal journey and how you got to be where you are today?
Yes, so good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So, as you know, my name is Juliana Answer. My career started a long time ago. I always have to sigh before I say it, but I gauge it by the year 2000. That's the year I started working. I started in the voluntary sector as a volunteer, which is not so common these days. And I was a youth worker for over 10 years. I worked with local authorities. I worked with the NHS. I was really embedded into the community. And a light bulb hit that actually I'm not really going to progress in this route. I've learned so many skills and knowledge. I need to find somewhere where I can transfer it that has more opportunities. So I went back to university to study health service management and have been in the NHS since 2015. I must say, starting a new career path, although it's all part of health and social care, was very scary and I didn't have the relevant support at the time. So I did start off as a band 3 support worker, although I had a degree in management and took some time to understand the system. I did progress in not necessarily in a linear way, but I did take a lot of sideways promotions, as you would call it, specialized in quality improvement. And now I am the head of equity for East London NHS, as well as the CEO and founder of Black Leaders.
Right, thank you, Julianne. I think it's really interesting. You've both done a lot to kind of outside of just doing your roles to get to progress and get where you need to be. So some of that's really quite striking. Um, and Jamila, in terms of because you've talked about proving yourself outside of your day job and doing leadership jobs outside of your paid work, which I think is really interesting and important and something that I think anyone who's interested in going into leadership needs to think about. Um, but you must have had those thoughts about, yeah, I can be a senior member of a team, I can be a leader, I can progress. So what was the kind of defining moment that made you think, yeah, this is where I belong, this is what I do, this is what I should be doing?
Thank you. I think that it maybe wasn't one defining moment, but I think I really benefited from working under the leadership of other women who saw my potential and who spoke into me what I could do. And it wasn't any kind of big sit down conversation. It's just the constant, regular reminders of, yeah, that was really good work. Yeah, you should do this. Yeah, no, you're better than you think. Try, give that a go. Yeah, of course you're ready for this. And just kind of encouraging us to go that little bit further when my own doubt was maybe, I would have stayed in my comfort zone many, many times if I didn't have people who saw the path for me that I didn't even know existed. And so I think that it really is that we talk a lot about paying it forward. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about leadership and women in leadership particularly, is that there's a real responsibility to say to others, you don't even know what your potential is, but there's so much more out there than the thing that you're in right now. And I'm really grateful for those leaders that I worked with for showing me that path.
Yeah. What about you, Juliana? You mentioned that you didn't initially get a lot of support. So what was the defining moment for you in terms of feeling that you belonged and you should be here?
It was because I wasn't getting that support, to be honest. I like to challenge the status quo and get things done. I work at an incredibly fast pace. And for me, it was the impact of the small acts. So not anyone blatantly. I worked in youth work. So it wasn't people coming to me and saying, oh, I love this because of you. It was really me acknowledging the spaces that I was able to create with enough support that would really make a difference to the community, make them feel seen or heard for the first time. So what really pushed me was as I continued to progress, I realized that it was a different challenge. Yes, there's still red tape everywhere, but I had the power to make changes that I was striving for earlier on in my career to make an impact.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm kind of conscious because it's 2025 and we're still having this conversation about women and some of the challenges that women face. But Jamila, in your experience, what have you seen in terms of maybe some of those barriers, some of those challenges that women face in leadership today? I mean, you hear phrases like glass ceiling, glass cliff. What have you experienced any of that over the course of your past 10 years?
I think that there are so many of these phrases, aren't they? And I think, glass ceiling is certainly one. Glass cliff is one that I actually was only familiar with a number of weeks ago. Imposter syndrome, I think, is something that many of us can relate to at some point, particularly early on. But also, I think if you do get into the glass cliff situation where you maybe are in a role sooner than you need to be, that imposter syndrome may come in again. And that is really just about internalizing the doubt about our own abilities. I think there's an issue around a lack of mentorship around, and that doesn't mean a kind of program where you necessarily sign up and find someone that's completely dedicated, but I mean the kind of more soft, informal, let me take you for lunch in the office situations, where I guess in a majority male workplace, maybe that happens more naturally within those groups. And if you're in a minority, it's harder to find your senior kin that might take you under their wing and give you that support. It's worth noting the maternal wall and women who are pregnant or who have kids finding barriers about, progression or coming back to work and not having their old jobs respected. That's very, very real and very, very current. Doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And then I think I want to also raise on the flip side, I guess, some behavioral barriers. I think it can be easy in the workplace to think about you may be around lots of men behaving a certain way and think, well, that's how I should act to succeed. And that's not always right, not least because, as we know, when women are as assertive as men, we're told we're bossy. And then we're told to kind of be quiet. And then when we're quiet, we're overlooked or put in the kind of caretaking volunteer roles and not really put on the same progression path. So I think there's kind of a catch-22 there that we find ourselves in. But I think the barrier that we, need to be really mindful of is not trying to act like other people is really important, and recognizing the value that we bring as ourselves in terms of the behavioral piece, and really just focusing on the value that women bring to the workplace as us.
Yeah, so feel confident enough to be yourself, be authentically you, which is difficult, and a lot of women, I've experienced this myself, and I think I've seen it, go through a lot of their work life, trying to live up to those roles that they think they should be doing. But actually, when you find that confidence to just be you, it is so much better for you from a mental health and a well-being perspective, as well as, probably you're bringing more to the organization. But yeah, I completely agree. I mean, in your role, Julianne, obviously within an NHS trust now, from your experience, I guess also for women and future female leaders to progress, the environment needs to be right, the organization needs to be right, and the structures and the individuals that might help need to be in place. So what's the best way organization can tackle unconscious bias? We all have thousands of unconscious biases that we aren't even aware of, but to try and ensure that everyone, regardless of your sex, has the best or a fair shot at progressing.
Yeah, so when it comes to unconscious bias, I'd say we spent so much time on awareness in so many different ways. There's so many trainings offered by everyone and anyone for all of the protected characteristics, intersectionality, all of that. I think Training is great, but alone does not make a difference and is not enough. We need to move away from awareness to action. We need to, especially for women, start creating transparent career progression routes. When it comes to women's health, and I work in healthcare, there's a lot of things that are overlooked. The standard basic periods, PMS, menopause, the impact that then has on career progression, the attitudes people might have towards you because you're not feeling well, you're physically not well. It's not a clinical or medical issue that allows you to take time off, or it contributes to burnout as well. But then when it's related to women's health, how serious do they take it? You almost have to make it seem that it's more about the system and the work that trumps how you feel and what you're going through. So I think in terms of unconscious bias, we need to normalize challenge. There is a challenge. It does exist, and make leadership roles more equity based, with thought management, thought leadership. And yeah, again, move away from awareness to action. I think we're all aware now. As I hate calling it unconscious. I think it's conscious bias now.
Yeah, agree. Jamila, were you going to say something to that?
Yeah, just, 100% yes to everything that Juliana said. And if I could just add one thing, it's awareness to action and then accountability, I think would be the next A that I wanted to raise. And I think it's so important for organizations to track what they're doing. And, if it's that old thing of if you do the same thing every single day and nothing changes, it's just insanity. So we have to actually be intentional about what we're doing, understand why we're doing it, monitor how it's going, collect the data, who's leading the projects, who's getting promoted, did they get paid the same, who's being mentored, who's not, in all of those questions, and then understand it and use that to inform the actual action that is taken. Otherwise it becomes based on assumptions, which is the A that we don't want. And I again, yeah, plus to the transparency point, which I think just gives people an understanding of what that path looks like for them to move up through the organization.
Absolutely, completely agree. And yeah, and I think we're only beginning to have conversations around, say menopause in the workplace, or women struggling with, PMS and all the other various women's health issues. As Juliana, you rightly say, they are so underfunded, so under-researched. So we need more of that, but talking about it hopefully highlights it more and more. And I'm seeing more workplaces at least taking it into account, which is a start. Julianne, if I could come to you, I mean, have you had that experience of being the first or only woman in a leadership role? And if so, how did that feel?
So based on my career progression, I've often, well, not a while ago, I think for around 9 years of my career, I took on a lot of short-term ad hoc roles, especially for my career progression. And a lot of these roles were the first time ever. They were trialing out something new in the organization, or they already had a team. I did a lot of work outside of London areas, which are not as diverse as London. And I would say it's been a privilege and a pressure. When you are the first or the only, you're visualized. Everyone knows you, everyone sees you. But because the system has not had it yet, and there's no one really understands yet how it fits in, that's usually my job to say, hey, I'm here. This is what I've come to do. How can we work together? Although I'm hypervisual, there's many times where my voice is ignored because there's no system or process yet to accept or take what I'm doing. So what has been very helpful for me is safe spaces and strong allies. I'm not the only woman in a leadership role in the organization. There are others. There are also, especially in the NHS, a lot of women who are the first and only, and who work in a team, but they are the team. It's just them. So finding allies with those people, and negotiating. I've had to rely a lot on negotiating and bargaining and explaining to people why this work matters, especially working in equality, and how it fits into their work. I think the key takeaway for me from being the first and only in multiple roles is about embedding equality into existing teams rather than bringing them over to equality. It should be embedded in the system. So I've done that a lot to try and make my work easier. Try.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the things that came up, we did a big survey to potential audience today. So anyone who signed up, we asked them kind of around the theme of what we were going to be talking about. One issue that came out again and again was the issue of confidence for women in leadership roles. And more specifically, women struggling with it. I think, Jamila, you mentioned, the maternal wall, that whole, the motherhood penalty, and when women return to the workplace, having had their first child or second child, whatever, that lack of confidence, and then being able to build up again, and being out of a workplace for sometimes a year is a real challenge. That's just one example. Jamila, in terms of that confidence piece, how do you lead with confidence? Where actually, and I'm sure you've experienced, you walk into a room and all of a sudden you feel like you're the only woman, and you feel outnumbered, or you feel you're probably not feeling the confidence, but you know that, okay, for this role, for what I'm doing right now, for this project, I need to show up and be confident. How do you wrestle with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was trying to think about this because there are still so many of those situations, even if I am familiar with the people, where I sit there and I'm like, I don't know as much as them. But I think the important thing to hold on to is that I know something different. And I'm in the room because I have a different contribution to what the other people in the room have. And I think even just in a kind of simple, if we just think of it as kind of a statistics or a math situation, if you're in the minority, and if people are welcoming you in because you're in the minority, it's because they want that difference. They want to hear what you have to say, or they should in a meaningful way. And so I think to make that, to make your presence more than tokenistic, you kind of just have to take up the space. And these things are so fleeting, and it can be really intimidating. A half hour or an hour meeting can feel really intimidating, but the time will pass, and it's an opportunity to use your voice and be remembered, to say something of interest. And I think that it's a really important thing to note that imposter syndrome does a really good job of helping us to disqualify ourselves from situations where we could be catapulted into something really, really powerful. And it tells us why we shouldn't be somewhere, we shouldn't say something, we shouldn't talk to this person, we shouldn't dress this way. But ultimately, all of that doesn't matter, because what we have in our minds is completely unique, and how we convey it, only we can do. And so I think that if you I used to really hate public speaking, as an example. I had zero confidence in it, but at some point it kind of flipped, because I realized that it's not about being right or wrong, but I could only speak about what I knew about, and that had to be enough. And once I kind of settled into that, I got a lot more confident with it, and I think that it's a journey. No one's going to get there overnight, but you have to kind of back yourself enough to know that you're there for a reason. And if someone turns to you and says, "What do you think?" you should completely feel entitled to take up that space and tell them what you think.
Yeah. And I think that point about disqualifying yourself before you even start, I think a lot of women, a lot of individuals, actually, I think it isn't just for women, but I think we feel it more, because I think perhaps maybe it's some nature that we just think about it more, and think about what we don't know, rather than focusing on what, as you say, your unique experience as an individual and what you're bringing to that conversation is so important. This is a great point. I wanted to pick up on something that actually came up in our survey, which was, we often get this when we survey, but we had someone who shared a pretty strong opinion, and this isn't uncommon. They said white heterosexual males are equally capable, and like I say, that isn't uncommon when we're sending out surveys like this, or asking for opinions. And I think it touches maybe on something you mentioned, Juliana, but how do you think we can keep those kind of these conversations open and positive, without alienating others and turning them into maybe negative arguments, which is probably a fairly topical point these days. So maybe, Juliana, if you could give me your thoughts on that, and I might come to you, Jamila.
So my response is that white heterosexual males may be equally competent. It's not an argument. There's no need for any type of defensiveness when having these type of conversations. I'd say always invite dialogue and not debate. It's about acknowledging everyone's humanity and intersectionality. Nothing is black and white. Me as a black African British woman might have a lot of things in common with this white heterosexual male, especially in terms of in the boardroom, education or profession. There might be similarities. And so the focus should always be on values, fairness, opportunities, and respect. When you tackle those within intersectionality, you do end up supporting not just a conversation, but having real effective change that supports a lot of people. And in my work as in EDI, when we only focus on one particular group, it does always impact and have a flow on other groups. But if you look at intersectionality and focus on the values and the shared experience, that's when you're really looking at system change and moving away from tokenism. So I'd say it's fine that they feel like that, but be in a space where you can have a dialogue and not a debate about it.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Jamila? You know, perhaps when you're talking about something that you feel you maybe know, they might not be that they might not articulate it, but you can sense that someone's uncomfortable or finding it a bit difficult, or perhaps just feel like it's a personal attack on them. How do you deal with that and keep it positive?
Yeah, I think it's a really sensitive topic, and I try really hard to treat it as a sensitive topic because my gut feeling, frankly, is yes, white heterosexual males are equally as capable, but that word equally is what I want to focus on, not more, equally.
Yes.
And so if we're agreeing that it's level, our point is people who aren't white heterosexual males aren't having the equal opportunities and proving that they're equally capable. So all we're trying to do is create the space for that equality of capability to be given a fair competitive chance at the jobs that we're talking about. So I don't disagree with the statement. I think it's used defensively. To Juliana's point, it becomes like a personal thing. Whereas really it's, yes, everyone is equally capable of doing this work. People aren't better than this or that because they're men or women or white or black. It's down to their talent, which is equally distributed. We need to create pathways for that to come through. And that's what this work is. So I actually think taking it back to almost kind of the needs of the work, the mechanics of what we're talking about, rather than the personal who we are, kind of helps us get around it a little bit. But I also think it's worth mentioning that I do believe that we need allies. I believe that we need to make this an inclusive journey. I also think that there's an inevitability to this work. We're only going to become a society with more gender balanced organizations, more diversity in our workplaces, in our schools, in our societies, in our communities. People need to be prepared for that and welcome it, be excited about it. And I think that's the journey people need to go on to kind of start to counter the defensiveness that's coming up in that survey response that you shared.
Yeah, no, agree. And to that point, just as part of my research, and I'm sure you've seen this, but there's more CEOs in the top FTSE 100 called Simon or Andrew than are women. So they're doing quite well, the Simon and Andrew group, not so much the women. So we've got, there's 19 female CEOs in the FTSE 100. The FTSE 350. Apologies, 9 in the FTSE 100 and 10 in the FTSE 250. So, that just is an indication in itself that there's a long way to go and why we need to keep having these conversations. I agree with what you said. And building on that, Jamila, those stats have shown, men clearly hold a bigger proportion of senior roles in business, in organizations across the UK. So there are many times that as women, we find ourselves in all male meetings, I mean, I just don't even notice it anymore personally. But do you have any tips for anyone watching in terms of how they handle those moments, and maybe particularly when they're starting out on their journey? Because, I've certainly had it where you've got an individual perhaps who's taking over the conversation, and it's difficult to get your opinion out, particularly if you're feeling unconfident and you're struggling with imposter syndrome. So what are your tips on that?
I think I touched on this slightly in my earlier question about one of my earlier answers, but I think in a practical sense, it's really important to remember that if you see it, other people in the room probably see it as well. So if there's someone there that's talking too much or taking up too much space or cutting you off, it's unlikely that you're going to be the only person that's picking up on that and is feeling a way about it, let's say. It's not a reflection of your capability, your strength, your weaknesses, anything like that. On a really practical sense, you can prepare strong opening points. You can speak early so that your voice is in the room and people know that you're willing to speak.
Yeah.
Even if it's just to say, I agree, just something that brings you into the room in a really practical sense. I think people can listen to you a lot if you try and set a tone in a certain way. If you are interrupted and you feel capable and strong enough, you can just say, would you mind if I finished my point? Or something quite gentle and soft like that. But I think beyond that, I think we need to make sure that organizations and mentors and managers are holding the space for the more junior people to speak up for themselves and take up the space that they need to. Maybe it should be your manager that's saying, I'm so sorry, but Claire was just speaking, would you mind if she finished? And I think it's on that point, it's really about finding allies.
Yeah.
Not within the meeting, but before or after, if you know the personalities you're going into the room with.
Yes.
Doing a little bit of pre-work to kind of find a couple of people who are like-minded who can help you, go through the conversation together. Just some practical thoughts that come to mind.
People who are aware of how that might unfold. Completely agree. We're getting some comments, and one I thought was quite interesting. Somebody saying, they're here to learn, and things that we've been saying resonate with them as a man. I too wrestle with imposter syndrome, have disqualified myself from roles and positions, and as a father to a daughter, that's also poignant for me to hear. Thank you to all. So I think that's really a key point. I know for a fact it's not just women who struggle with imposter syndrome, and I know none of us would say that, but I think it is something, and I think it's that maybe sense of allyship. If you are a man and you get it, then you probably, again, creating that space for other individuals in the conversation. And Juliana, from your perspective, again, on our survey, someone raised the point that they found it challenging working with very ambitious CEOs and boards. So how do you, on a day-to-day basis, manage high expectations, perhaps from those in senior roles without making it realistic, really, in terms of what's deliverable? So not feeling overawed that you can't kind of maybe challenge or explain that actually maybe this isn't necessarily achievable within a time frame, or whatever it might be.
So I have had a lot of this experience in my career. One of the key things I'd say is if the CEO and board have high expectations, then they should also have high investment in whatever they want being done. Because we do talk about the glass cliff as well, where you're put into impossible roles and challenges. And sometimes, in my experience, that has been due to the expectations of the board. For example, I was once asked to cure racism within an organization in 1 year. They didn't want any incident at all. And it's like we cannot do this, number one. So it's about being very realistic, speaking to them about KPIs. I come from a data background, so I understand equally how important it is, but where it doesn't always fill up the cup, and you do need to look at values and outcomes. What do you really want to change? So creating a realistic focus with actionable steps, and longer term goals and plans. Not everything has to be done in 12 months anymore, depending on where you're working. So I'd say always be honest about timelines and resourcing, and use your expertise to negotiate and propose what is possible with them.
Great, thanks, Juliana. And yeah, I've got another. I mean, we're getting lots of comments, but somebody's saying, Yvonne, let's not forget intersectionality and the additional barriers for Black women. And I wanted to come to some of the work you're doing, Jamila, with the 10,000 Interns Foundation and your work supporting young Black people over the past 5 years that the organization have been doing. What can leaders do now to make sure, that next generation doesn't face the same barriers, or they're not quite as challenging perhaps as they were maybe for the current generation? What are your thoughts on that? It's a
Well,
big question.
Yeah, it's a huge question, and I'm mindful of Juliana's answer of, this isn't an overnight fix. We can't
No.
do this in a year or two. So although we've been around for 5 years and we're really proud of our work, this really is just the very beginning. It's a pinpoint in a massive journey that we have to undertake together. But I think the important thing is that the action that those organizations have taken to hire the talent that they maybe wouldn't have hired otherwise is an example of acting now, doing something different than what you were doing before, thinking long term about strategies and how you really want young Black people to come into the workplace and stay in your workplace. Again, understanding that inevitability of diversity and not being afraid of these people that might be coming in and taking jobs from other people. It really is about building a community that does a workplace that does reflect the community that we will inevitably have. It means, again, to Juliana's point, investing in people, investing in access, investing in employee resource groups, investing in opportunities and trainings and mentorships and skills tests and all sorts of things that help all people at the beginning of their career get to the next level and the next level and the next level. So many people remember their very, very, very first job, the very, very first touch point of their career is so significant for pretty much all of us. And then whether it was a long one or a short one, it remains the foundational part. So if you are an employer that is that first touch point, there's a huge responsibility to give them a good experience and, give young women, young Black people, young Black women, young Black men, everyone a chance to understand what's possible in the world of work equally to people who may have got that job without even really trying or really thinking about it. I think so representation matters, inclusion matters, investment. I also think it comes back to that data point. It's auditing the work that the organization's doing, seeing if it works, and then if it doesn't, coming back and being iterative about the efforts being made, so that when we're talking about building, it's not, we set up this DEI scheme in 1997 and we've never looked back. You need to kind of think about it and refresh it and review it, make sure it's applicable, run surveys, see if people are genuinely enjoying it, use data to inform your practices, ask people how they feel, and track movement in and out of the organization to understand whether or not people genuinely like working for you or not.
Yeah.
I think that's where the information's going to lie, and I think that's how we can help people really get ahead of future barriers and planning for the future.
Yeah, because if you're reviewing the data, thinking about it and thinking, okay, how do we address this? Otherwise, as you say, you set it up and hope for the best. Not going to happen. We're having some comments around that. I mean, Sarah, the work around equality and equity is so important, but we are challenging long existing culture, values, beliefs, which is a huge change at societal level. Completely agree. Takes a long time, especially when we have global issues that slow this work down and embolden the naysayers. I think we all know what that is, and I think it makes the work even more important, just because certain people think it isn't important hasn't changed any of those facts. Julianne, on a positive note, what's the kind of maybe if you were to say one small but what you feel would be an important change that could make a big difference to women coming up behind you? So it's perhaps, organizations or current leaders, a change they could make to support those future generations of female leaders. What would that be?
I'm so sorry, I have two things. The first thing is very short. So
That's all right.
Normalize flexible career paths. There's so many boundaries to women and career progression, and normalizing that there are different paths where you can transfer skills would be a great opportunity for women to stay in organizations and not just leave and go elsewhere when there's a better opportunity. But then the next thing I'd say is for organizations to create more women's spaces. staff networks and groups for women where they discuss career progression specifically. It's about being able to invite women to the room before they feel ready or before the managers or system is ready. We need to start having those discussions and identifying the challenges and barriers.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that flexible career path is really important because we've touched on the motherhood penalty and that just, the fact that I think it's like um, a 10-year, decade-long block to women's progression. So it takes 10 years to recover from taking time off, on average, and that's probably longer for certain individuals. So that's really, really important. Thank you, Juliana. Um, and Jamila, how do you balance? Because we've touched on some of this, but what are your top tips in terms of balancing your leadership roles? You're doing you still presumably, I think you still have, you work outside of your main day job in a leadership role. So that's a lot. So how do you balance your well-being, especially when you're doing a number of busy and demanding roles? What are your tips on that?
So you're right, work is very busy and demanding, and it would be very easy for it to creep into my evenings and weekends, and it
Yeah.
often does. And I also have a lot of responsibilities at home, even outside of my extra work. At home, there's a lot of demands on me. So it might sound counterintuitive, but what I do is I try and set goals for my personal life, by which I mean, related to health and fitness, related to my mental health, related to my social life, related to my family. And then I hold those goals and I tell people about them. I hold them with as much importance as I hold my professional ones. And I think that means that once I've signed up for something, once I've told a friend we'll do something together, it makes it harder to go back on that commitment and let work creep into that time that I would like to spend doing XYZ. So I don't want to make it sound like a work plan, but for me personally, it means that I ring fence time to take care of my body, my mind, my community, my people, myself, ultimately. And it creates accountability, again, where friends can be like, did you go for that run you were going to go for? Or have you signed up for this thing you meant to do? Or weren't we meant to go to that gallery? And I think trying not to let the work creep into so much of our time is the only way I can do it is just by creating that boundary. So whatever you want to call it, I call it a goal plan. Maybe that's very type A of me, but I think really protecting that time at home with intention. Yeah. Without that, it all kind of would fall apart, is my opinion.
And I think not feeling guilty about that as well, because again, when you're on a certain career path, I don't know, you got to be seen to be going out to the social events that other people might go to, but actually that might not be right for you. You might need to take that time off, or you just don't want to, I don't know, have another drink or whatever it is. But not feeling guilty that, oh wow, because you're leaving on time because you have to fulfill that date that you said, or to take that to go to your exercise class or whatever it is. That's really important. Yeah. And Juliana, I know we've touched on a little bit of this, but I wanted to come back to it. We've talked about network groups, we've talked about mentors and allies, but if we'll have lots of people on this call who are, themselves leaders, and they're thinking about their environments and they're thinking about their own organizations, and they know they may have first or only individuals, maybe women in leadership roles. What's your advice to them to be able to support those individuals better?
So my advice would be for the organisations to go beyond just celebrating these new roles and invest in retention and well-being. So going back to well-being from Jamilia's point, these roles can be, especially my role, working in EDI, I'd say 90% of the time I'm dealing with racism, bias, bullying, discrimination, policy changes from the Supreme Court that then it impacts the workforce. There's so many elements to it, and it can be quite heavy because as the first or only, I'm expected to speak for all, but they don't want me to rock the boat. So they need to be quite balanced and aware of what do they actually want, and move away from the status quo. And I would say that additionally, I think Jamilia's touched on this point. It's about them diversifying and so not just diversifying the room, but also changing the culture of the room. Because what you will get is people coming in and code switching or trying to fit in to be acceptable, seeing what being confident and getting things done looks like within that space, and then mimicking it. So they really do need to work on that if they're bringing in someone first or new and hoping for culture change.
Yeah, because I think once you've recruited the individual, a lot of organizations think, oh, that's great, it's done now. We've got some balance or we've got more balance. Fantastic. But there's a lot of work that then needs to go to support those individuals. Jamil, I'm interested. I mean, you guys have placed now 10,000 interns and you're continuing that work. Was there a shift in terms of what you were talking to the organizations who were taking those interns in? You know, maybe the initial interns, did you learn from their experiences in terms of what then they needed? Perhaps if they were going into organizations where they didn't see people like them around them, you know, what the organizations in terms of support need to have in place to help those individuals. Does that make sense?
I think so. You know, since we've started this program, we've worked really closely on two different sides. We've worked with a small set of organizations who are really interested in making sure that their inclusion practices are up to scratch so that the interns that are joining have the best chance at success as possible. And I think that work has been really meaningful, and we have an incredible retention rate. We have something like 70% of our interns over the last 4 years are in full-time employment, and 30% are still with the places that they were interning. So that's kind of against market rate. That's quite astronomical in terms of retention and progression. So that's something we're really proud of. And I think that does speak to the genuine intention of the organization to make this work meaningful. This isn't, you know, tokenistic. It's not just a number on a sheet. It really is about improving not just the workplace, but giving people a chance at a career at a really pivotal point in their life. And then I think that it is really important that while there is work for the organizations to do, we do still have let's say, a business status quo that has a very particular style. And when people have different soft skills, then they are judged maybe disproportionately negatively because they don't have quite the right format of their CV, or they wear their suit slightly off, or their handshake isn't quite right. Or I think we've done a lot of work with our interns to say, yes, be authentic, and yes, be yourself, but be mindful of these soft skills, which you don't want to get tripped up on, you know, needlessly, that might create barriers for your own inclusion and welcome into the workplace.
Which are often those first impressions, and they're being judged on, and they don't even know they're being judged that way.
Yes, completely. And the last thing to say on that is that we have quite a lot of anecdotal data from our employers saying that despite those assumptions and those initial judgments, our interns have completely outperformed our employers' expectations of them, which raises a question about the expectations, but regardless, has blown everyone out of the water in terms of what they thought they were going to get from us, which just proves that first impression, those soft skills, what you think good looks like, is completely irrelevant when it comes down to capability in the workplace and, you know, what a person can really offer.
Yeah, definitely. No, that makes complete sense. And just another comment we've got here, and we've touched on the motherhood penalty, but that it contributes, and I think we know, unfortunately, the data isn't getting any better on this, but it contributes to the gender pay gap, which is not improving, and negatively impacts on women's long-term financial security, without a doubt, because, you know, like I've mentioned, it's a kind of a 10-year penalty to get back even to parity to where a lot of women were before they went off on maternity leave, which is a very long time. Plus, I think it's something like, I saw a statistic the other week, it's something like a 35 billion hit to the economy, GDP, losing the talent of those women, because they're at a point in their career where they're really contributing and they're really beginning to get what they do in their roles, and then we lose them, and we lose them for a good 10 years, and often many of them don't come back in at the same level, and we've lost those skills when we can ill afford to. So that's something, even a greater driver, I think, for organizations to be aware. But I want to finish on a more positive note. So Juliana, I mean, we've talked about kind of some of the challenges and some of the issues, but for you, what does success look like for women leaders today? When you look around, especially women of color, in your environment, what makes you feel positive about, change happening and the future?
So I guess this links very much to why I even started Black Leaders, CIC, or also known as Black Leaders in Healthcare. We have a board of 5 Black women from all over the country who specialize in healthcare, who have had challenges in career progression. These are people with multiple degrees, masters, even PhDs, who haven't been able to progress. And although we're from different specialties within healthcare, we came together to tackle inequality from 2 ends. It's preparing the Black and Asian and diverse workforce for more senior roles, but at the same time working with organizations to change and improve the culture. And a lot of that is embedded into policy. It's not just about personal opinions, it's about the system. So I'd say for us, success is a collective. The goal is not a personal reward, but how many people can follow up after us. So for me personally, I'd say success looks like Black women being in leadership roles without it being remarkable. It needs to be normalized.
Yeah, thank you, Juliana. And Jamila, I know 10,000 interns. I think you've got, what is it, female-led organization and massively diverse. So what does success look like for you in the work you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I will say that our entire C-suite is completely female and women of Black heritage. So we are very proud of that. And the work is still hard. We don't always agree on everything, but it makes a real difference to the quality of my experience at work, I will say. I think in terms of, success for women in leaders today and in the future, I think that I touched on it just now, but I think the way that we talk about success and quality just needs to be different. I think for women, for all the reasons we've discussed today, the demands are different. And I think that that's okay. And I think that rather than try and battle against it or keep it in the individual to make these trade-offs and decisions about what to sacrifice and what to disqualify yourself from, there just needs to be more flexibility, more choice of what the reality of a working woman leader's life looks like in its entirety, and find ways for women to be leaders within that rather than having to hide certain parts of it. People can be totally one eye on their career if they want to. Others can be family first. I think, there's a myriad of ways to make it work, but I think that choice and that flexibility is what is at the crux of it. And then just to kind of, again, agree with Juliana's point, I think being able to pull people up after us is going to be what really will make the difference. It's not about getting to the top and then pulling the ladder up with us. I think we need to, as I said at the beginning, be paying it forward, be, looking for people's potential, showing pathways where they may not be able to see it. And I think all of those things will lead to the great change.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to finish on. And I think anyone listening, male or female on this call, if you're thinking about who are you bringing on, who are you supporting, who are you even unofficially mentoring, and who maybe even today, this week, next month, you should be having a conversation with to say, you can do more. You're very talented. And I know people need to hear that sometimes because we're so busy and we're so focused on the business goals or the organization goals that we just don't spend time thinking about that. And that's a great positive note to finish our conversation on. Thank you. I'm afraid that's all we have time for this morning. I'd just like to thank everyone who took time out of their morning to join us. I hope you found this conversation as insightful and useful as I did. But a very big thank you to my 2 wonderful guests today. Thank you to Juliana and thank you to Jamila for sharing your experiences and your expertise so generously with us this morning. Just a quick reminder, we will share a recording of this session within the next 24 hours, and we'll also include information in terms of how you can contact both Jamila and Juliana if you wish to. So the recording is coming your way, but thank you all and have a great rest of the day.